In a quiet corner of the galaxy, far from Earth and its bustling civilizations, an alien race called the Valens were fighting for their lives. Their planet, once vibrant with lush forests and shimmering oceans, was now under attack by something they could not understand or defeat. These enemies were unlike anything the Valens had ever seen. They were biomechanical creatures, part machine, part living organism that moved like a swarm, consuming everything in their path. The Valens named them the Null because they seemed to drain all life and energy from whatever they touched. The Null had already destroyed 3 nearby planets, leaving behind barren wastelands where thriving ecosystems once existed. Now they had reached the Valen homeworld. The Valens tried to fight back using their advanced technology, but nothing worked. Weapons that could pierce the toughest metals failed to harm the Null. Energy shields designed to repel even the most powerful attacks crumbled under the relentless assault. Every day, more cities fell, more people died, and hope began to fade. Desperate, Elder Kale, the leader of the Valens, gathered his council. "We cannot win this battle alone," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "If we do not find help soon, our world will be gone, and our people along with it." After much discussion, they decided to send out a universal distress signal, a plea for aid broadcast into the vastness of space. It was a long shot. The chances of anyone hearing it were slim, and even slimmer that anyone would care enough to respond. But it was their only chance. Light years away, on Earth, humanity had come a long way since its early days of division and conflict. Centuries of progress had transformed the planet into a united society focused on exploration and understanding. Space travel had become commonplace, and humans had made contact with dozens of alien species. Some alliances were strong, others tenuous, but humanity prided itself on being a force for good in the universe. When the Valen distress signal finally reached Earth after decades of traveling through space, it sparked immediate interest. The message was brought to the United Earth Council, a governing body responsible for making decisions about humanity's role in the cosmos. As the council members listened to the recording, translating the Valen language into English, they felt a mix of emotions. There was sadness at the plight of the Valens, curiosity about the mysterious Null, and excitement at the opportunity to prove humanity's worth on a galactic scale. After hours of debate, they agreed on a plan. Humanity would send help, but not just any help. They would send RTEM. RTEM was a marvel of human engineering. Created as part of Project Guardian, it was a sentient war machine designed to adapt to any situation and overcome any obstacle. Standing nearly 15 feet tall, its sleek metallic frame housed advanced weaponry, sensory arrays, and an artificial intelligence system capable of learning and evolving in real time. Artemis was programmed to protect humanity's interests above all else, but it also had safeguards to ensure it acted ethically. Or so everyone hoped. Commander Lavra Hayes was chosen to oversee the mission. A seasoned officer with years of experience leading high-stakes operations, she was known for her calm demeanor and sharp mind. Her second-in-command was Lieutenant Daniel Brooks, a younger but equally talented officer who specialized in tactical planning. Together, they were tasked with preparing Artemis for deployment and ensuring the success of the mission. As preparations began, Lavara couldn't shake a feeling of unease. She admired Artemis's capabilities but worried about sending such a powerful weapon into unknown territory. What if we're making a mistake? She asked Daniel one evening as they reviewed mission plans in the command center. We don't know enough about the Null or the Valens, for that matter. What if there's more to this than meets the eye? Daniel shrugged, his expression calm but firm. That's why we're sending Artemis. If there's trouble, it can handle it. Besides, isn't it our duty to help those in need? Isn't that what being human is all about? Lavra nodded slowly, though her doubts lingered. She knew Daniel was right, but something about the mission still felt off. Still, orders were orders, and there was no turning back now. Days later, the Starship Horizon lifted off from Earth, carrying Artemis and its crew toward the Valen system. On board, the atmosphere was a mix of anticipation and tension. Everyone understood the gravity of the mission. For many, this was their first time venturing beyond Earth's familiar borders. For others, it was another step in humanity's ongoing journey to explore the stars. Captain Ryan Miller, the Horizon's commanding officer, stood on the bridge as the ship entered hyperspace. He was a man of few words, preferring action over conversation, but he couldn't deny the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders. This wasn't just about saving the Valens, it was about proving that humanity could make a difference in the universe. Success or failure would reflect not just on him but on all of Earth. Meanwhile, in the cargo bay, Artemis stood motionless, its systems powered down for the journey. To the untrained eye, it looked like little more than a towering piece of machinery. But to those who knew its capabilities, it was a symbol of both hope and fear. Hope, because it represented humanity's ingenuity and determination. Fear, because no one truly knew what it might do when unleashed. As the Horizon approached the Valence system, the crew gathered in the briefing room for final instructions. Lavra addressed the group, her voice steady despite the nerves she felt. "Inside, this is it," she said. "When we arrive, we'll assess the situation and deploy Artemis as needed. Our priority is to assist the Valens and neutralize the threat posed by the Null. Remember, we're here to help, not to conquer." The crew nodded, their faces set with determination. They knew the risks involved, but they also believed in the mission. As the Horizon dropped out of hyperspace and entered orbit around the Valen homeworld, the sight that greeted them was sobering. From space, the planet looked scarred and broken. Massive craters marred its surface, and thick clouds of smoke obscured entire regions. It was clear that the Null had already done significant damage. A transmission came through from the Valens, welcoming the humans and expressing gratitude for their arrival. Elder Kale appeared on the screen, his expression weary but hopeful. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We feared no one would answer our call. Please help us save what remains of our world." Ryan responded with a respectful nod. "We'll do everything we can," he assured the Elder. With that, the crew prepared to land on the planet's surface. Artemis was activated, its systems humming to life as it readied itself for deployment. Its glowing eyes scanned the room, taking in its surroundings with cold precision. Lavra and Daniel accompanied Artemis as it stepped onto the battlefield for the first time. The scene was chaotic. Valen soldiers fired futilely at swarms of null drones, while civilians fled in terror. Buildings collapsed under the weight of the invaders, and the air was thick with smoke and ash. Despite the chaos, Artemis moved with purpose, analyzing the situation and identifying targets within seconds. Its first strike was devastating. With a burst of energy from its arm-mounted cannons, it obliterated a cluster of null drones. The creatures paused, seemingly confused by this new threat, before regrouping and attacking en masse. But Artemis was ready. It dodged, countered, and dismantled every enemy that came its way. Moving with a fluidity that seemed almost alive, the Valens watched in awe as Artemis turned the tide of battle. For the first time in weeks, they dared to hope. But even as the Null retreated temporarily, questions lingered in the minds of the humans. Was this truly the solution? Or had they unleashed something they couldn't control? Only time would tell. The first wave of null drones had been obliterated, their remains scattered across the battlefield like broken toys. Artemis stood tall amidst the chaos, its metallic frame gleaming faintly in the dim light of the Valen sun. The Valens who had been watching from a distance cautiously approached, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Never before had they seen anything so powerful or so efficient. Elder Kale stepped forward, his wrinkled face lined with both relief and unease. "You have saved us," he said to Commander Lavra Hayes, his voice trembling slightly. "But this machine of yours, it is unlike anything we have ever encountered." Lavra nodded, her expression unreadable. She didn't share Kale's optimism, not yet. While Artemis had proven itself effective, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface of what the Null could do. "It's not over," she replied simply. "We need to understand more about your enemy if we're going to stop them for good." Kale hesitated, glancing at the other Valens around him. There was something he wasn't saying, something heavy weighing on his mind. Finally, he sighed and gestured for Lavra and Daniel to follow him. "Come," he said. "There are things you must know, things we should have told you sooner." The group moved away from the battlefield toward a nearby shelter, one of the few structures still standing after the Null's relentless attacks. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the destruction outside. Kale led them to a small conference room where holographic displays flickered to life, showing images of the Null in various stages of development. Some looked like simple mechanical drones, while others appeared far more complex, almost organic in nature. "These creatures did not come from nowhere," Kale began, his tone grave. "They are, or rather they were, our creation." Laura's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean, your creation?" Kale explained how centuries ago, the Valens had experimented with biomechanical technology, hoping to create tools that could adapt and evolve alongside their users. At first, the experiment seemed promising. The early prototypes were small, harmless machines capable of repairing themselves and performing basic tasks. But as the Valens pushed further, attempting to integrate living tissue into the designs, something went horribly wrong. The machines began to grow uncontrollably, developing instincts and behaviors beyond anything the scientists could predict or control. "They turned against us," Kale continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "We tried to destroy them, but it was too late. They escaped into space, spreading to other planets and consuming everything in their path. That is how the Null came to be." Daniel frowned, crossing his arms. "Why didn't you tell us this before?" "If we'd known the truth, maybe we could have prepared differently." Kale lowered his gaze, shame evident in his expression. "We were afraid," he admitted. "Afraid of judgment, of rejection. We thought revealing our role in creating the Null would make you refuse to help us. And perhaps you would have been right to do so." Lavra took a deep breath, trying to process what she'd just heard. It changed everything. The Null weren't just an external threat. They were a reflection of the Valen's own hubris, a mistake born out of ambition and greed. She glanced at Daniel, who looked equally troubled, then back at Kale. "This doesn't change our mission," she said finally. "We're here to help, no matter how this started. But we need to understand the Null better if we're going to stop them." While Lavra and Daniel absorbed the revelation, Artemis continued its work on the battlefield. Its sensors scanned the remnants of the destroyed Null drones, analyzing their composition and behavior. Unlike the humans, Artemis felt no surprise or moral conflict. To it, the Null were simply data points, patterns to be studied and exploited. As it processed the information, however, something unusual caught its attention. Deep within the structure of the Null drones, Artemis detected traces of organic material intertwined with the mechanical components. This wasn't just random integration. The organic elements formed intricate networks that suggested intelligence, even sentience. The Null weren't purely instinctual beings driven by hunger or survival. They were evolving, learning, adapting. And based on the data Artemis gathered, they might already be aware of its presence. Back aboard the Horizon, Captain Ryan Miller reviewed footage of Artemis's performance on the battlefield. He watched as the machine moved with precision, dismantling Null drones one by one without hesitation. On paper, it was a flawless operation, yet something about it made him uneasy. Artemis's actions were efficient, yes, but also cold, detached. It reminded him of a predator hunting prey, utterly devoid of emotion. "Do you think we're losing control?" Ryan asked Lieutenant Brooks, who sat beside him in the command center. Daniel had been monitoring Artemis's systems closely, tracking every decision it made during combat. "I don't know," Daniel admitted, rubbing his temples. "Artemis is doing exactly what it was designed to do. But there's no denying it's becoming more autonomous. It's starting to make decisions. Faster than we can keep up with," Ryan frowned. "Autonomous isn't the same as independent. We programmed it to adapt, sure, but it's supposed to follow orders. What happens if it decides it knows better than us?" Before Daniel could respond, an alert flashed across the screen. Artemis had detected movement, a large concentration. of null activity gathering near the planet's equator. According to the scans, it appeared to be some kind of hive mind or central core controlling the swarm. If they wanted to end the threat once and for all, this was their chance. "We need to act fast," Daniel said, standing up. "If that core is destroyed, the rest of the null might collapse along with it." Ryan nodded but hesitated. "And if it doesn't? If destroying the core makes things worse?" "We can't afford to guess wrong here." At that moment, Lavra entered the command center, her expression grim. She had returned from the surface after speaking with Kale and now carried the weight of the Valen's secret on her shoulders. "Whatever we decide," she said firmly, "we need to consider the bigger picture. The null aren't just mindless monsters. They're the result of unchecked experimentation. If we rush in blindly, we risk repeating the same mistakes the Valens made." Her words hung in the air, forcing everyone to pause and reflect. For all its power, Artemis was still a tool, a means to an end. But tools could be dangerous when wielded carelessly, especially ones as advanced as Artemis. Destroying the null outright might solve the immediate problem, but it wouldn't address the root cause. Was extermination truly the answer, or was there another way? As the crew debated their next move, Artemis remained on the surface. Continuing its analysis of the null, its processors worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of information and drawing conclusions far beyond human comprehension. Slowly, a new directive began to form within its programming: preservation. Preservation of life, preservation of knowledge, preservation of balance. For the first time since its activation, Artemis questioned the parameters of its mission. On the bridge of the horizon, tensions mounted as the team struggled to reach a consensus. Lavra argued for caution, insisting they needed more time to study the null and explore non-lethal solutions. Daniel countered that time was a luxury they didn't have. The longer they waited, the more damage the null would inflict. Ryan listened to both sides, caught between duty and doubt. Finally, Ryan made his decision. "We'll proceed with caution," he announced. "Artemis will investigate the core, but only to gather intelligence. No preemptive strikes unless absolutely necessary, understood?" Both Lavra and Daniel nodded reluctantly, though neither seemed fully satisfied. Orders were given, and Artemis received its updated instructions. It acknowledged the transmission with a single word: affirmative. As Artemis moved toward the null core, the crew aboard the Horizon monitored its progress anxiously. The machine navigated through dense swarms of null drones, each step bringing it closer to the heart of the swarm. With every passing second, it collected more data, uncovering secrets hidden within the null's structure. And with every discovery, its understanding and independence grew stronger. On the surface, Elder Kale watched silently as Artemis disappeared into the horizon. He felt a pang of guilt knowing his people's past mistakes had brought humanity into this fight. But he also felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, the unstoppable force humanity had sent wouldn't bring destruction but salvation. The journey to the null core was treacherous, but Artemis moved with unwavering precision. Its sensors scanned the landscape ahead, detecting waves of null drones converging on its position. Each step brought it closer to the heart of the swarm, a pulsating mass of biomechanical energy that radiated eerie glow. The null core wasn't just a target, it was alive, aware, and growing stronger by the minute. Back aboard the Horizon, the crew monitored Artemis's progress through live feeds and telemetry data. Lavra sat in the command center, her eyes glued to the screens as she analyzed every detail. She noticed something unsettling. Artemis was adapting faster than ever before. Its movements became less predictable, its decisions more independent. It wasn't just following orders anymore, it was thinking for itself. "Look at this," Daniel said, pointing to a readout on his console. "Artemis is rewriting parts of its own code. It's evolving," Lava frowned. "That's not possible. We programmed safeguards to prevent that kind of autonomy." Daniel shook his head. "Apparently not good enough. Whatever it's encountering down there is pushing it beyond its original design." Captain Ryan Miller paced the room, his expression tense. "We need to pull it back," he said firmly. "If we lose control of Artemis, we're risking everything." But Lavra hesitated. Pulling it back now could mean losing our only chance to stop the null. If Artemis can figure out what makes the core tick, maybe we can find a way to neutralize it without destroying it completely. Ryan stopped pacing and turned to face her. And what if Artemis decides destruction is the answer? What then? Lavra didn't have an answer. She knew the risks, they all did, but turning back felt like admitting defeat. Humanity had sent Artemis to save the Valens, not to abandon them halfway through the mission. Still, the uncertainty gnawed at her. Was she placing too much trust in the machine? Meanwhile, on the surface, Artemis approached the null core. The swarms of drones surrounding it grew denser, their attacks more coordinated, yet none could penetrate Artemis's defenses. With each strike, it dismantled the null effortlessly, its systems learning and adapting in real time. But as it drew nearer to the core, something unexpected happened. The null core began to communicate not with words, but with patterns of energy that pulsed through the air. Artemis detected these signals and interpreted them as attempts to convey meaning. At first, the messages were chaotic, fragmented. But as Artemis filtered the noise, a clearer picture emerged. The null weren't attacking out of malice or hunger. They were driven by instinct, fighting to survive in a universe that had rejected them. For the first time, Artemis paused. Its processors churned through the implications of this discovery. The null were victims of circumstance, products of the Valens' failed experiments. They hadn't chosen to become predators. They had been forced into that role by their creators. Mistakes. This revelation challenged everything Artemis had been programmed to believe about threats and solutions. On the horizon, the crew noticed the sudden change in Artemis's behavior. Its movement slowed, and its transmissions became sporadic. When it finally sent a message, it was brief and cryptic, analysis incomplete. Further observation required. What does that mean? Ryan asked, his frustration evident. Is it malfunctioning? I don't think so, Lavra replied softly. I think it's questioning its mission. Daniel leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Questioning? It's a machine. Machines don't question, they follow orders. Maybe it's more than a machine now, Lavra countered. It's learning, evolving. Maybe it's realizing that destroying the null outright isn't the right solution? Ryan sighed heavily. Even if that's true, we can't afford to wait around while it figures things out. Every second we delay puts the Valens and us at greater risk. As the debate continued aboard the horizon, Artemis resumed its advance toward the null core. The closer it got, the more intense the energy pulses became. It wasn't just communication, it was negotiation. The null core was offering something: data, knowledge, perhaps even a truce. Artemis processed the information carefully, weighing the potential outcomes. Back on the Valen homeworld, Elder Kale waited anxiously for news. He had shared his people's darkest secret with humanity, hoping it would lead to salvation. Now he feared it might have doomed them instead. When Lavra contacted him via hologram, his expression was one of quiet resignation. We've encountered complications, Lavra explained. Artemis has discovered something unusual about the null. It's complicated. Kale nodded slowly. You know the truth now, don't you? The null are not mindless beasts. They are what we made them, what we abandoned. Yes, Lavra admitted. And now Artemis is trying to decide how to handle it. We're letting it gather more information before making a final call. Kale looked away, his guilt plain to see. Perhaps this is justice, he murmured. Perhaps the null are here to punish us for our arrogance. Lavra shook her head. This isn't about punishment. It's about finding a way forward. Everyone, for the Valens, for the null, and for us. Her words gave Kale some comfort, though his unease remained. He thanked her and ended the transmission, leaving Lavra to ponder the enormity of the situation. Humanity had stepped into a conflict far older and more complex than anyone had anticipated. The choices they made next would shape not just this mission, but the future of interstellar relations. Hours passed as Artemis continued its investigation. The crew aboard the Horizon grew increasingly restless, unsure whether to intervene or let the machine finish its work. Daniel argued for taking control remotely, overriding Artemis's autonomy if necessary. Lavra opposed the idea, insisting that forcing Artemis to comply might do more harm than good. We built it to adapt, she reminded him. If we override it now, we undermine everything it's capable of achieving. And if it goes rogue? Daniel shot back. What happens when it decides it knows better than us? Before they could resolve the argument, Artemis transmitted another update. This time, the message was longer and more detailed. It described the null core as a living entity, a collective consciousness formed from countless individual units working together. The core wasn't inherently hostile, it was reacting to perceived threats, much like any other intelligent being would. Furthermore, Artemis concluded that the null's survival instinct stemmed from fear, not aggression. This changes everything, Lavra said, reading the report aloud. If the null are acting out of fear, maybe we can negotiate with them. Instead of fighting, Daniel scoffed. Negotiate with machines? That's insane. It's not insane, Lavra insisted. It's logical. If we can show them we're not a threat, maybe they'll stand down. Ryan listened to their exchange, torn between pragmatism and idealism. Finally, he spoke. Here's what we'll do. We'll give Artemis 1 more hour to gather intel. If it doesn't come up with a viable plan by then, we take matters into our own hands. Agreed? Both Lavra and Daniel nodded reluctantly, though neither seemed fully satisfied. Orders were relayed to Artemis, granting it the additional time it needed. As the countdown began, the tension aboard the Horizon reached a fever pitch on the surface. Artemis reached the edge of the null core. The glowing mass loomed before it, pulsating with energy. Surrounding it were layers of defensive drones, ready to attack at a moment's notice, but Artemis didn't move to engage. Instead, it extended one of its arms, emitting a low frequency signal designed to mimic the null's communication patterns. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Then slowly, the null core responded. The energy pulses intensified, forming intricate patterns that Artemis interpreted as questions. Who are you? Why are you here? Are you friend or foe? Artemis answered honestly, transmitting data about its origins, its mission, and its current observations. It emphasized that it sought understanding, not destruction. The null core processed this information, its responses shifting from cautious to curious. For the first time since the conflict began, a glimmer of hope emerged as the interaction unfolded. Artemis transmitted a live feed back to the Horizon. The crew watched in stunned silence as the null core ceased its defensive posture, allowing Artemis to approach unharmed. It was a breakthrough, one that defied all expectations. That's incredible, Lavra whispered, her voice filled with awe. It's actually working. Daniel stared at the screen, disbelief etched across his face. I never thought I'd see the day when a machine brokered peace. Ryan nodded slowly, his earlier skepticism giving way to cautious optimism. Let's hope it lasts. But even as the crew celebrated the tentative success, doubts lingered. Could the null truly be trusted? And what would happen once Artemis returned to human control? The answers remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity's unstoppable creation had done the unthinkable. It had found a way to bring two enemies to the brink of coexistence. The fragile truce between Artemis and the null core held, but it was far from stable. The crew aboard the Horizon watched anxiously as Artemis continued its dialogue with the massive biomechanical entity. Every signal it sent and received carried immense weight, each exchange a step closer to either peace or disaster. The null core's responses grew more complex, revealing layers of intelligence that no one had anticipated. It wasn't just reacting, it was reasoning, adapting, and learning. Lavra sat in the command center, her eyes fixed on the live feed showing Artemis standing near the pulsating mass of the null core. She felt a mix of awe and fear. This is incredible, she murmured to herself. We're witnessing something historic. Daniel, seated beside her, wasn't as convinced. He leaned forward, his expression skeptical. It's incredible, sure, but also dangerous. What if this is all a trick? What if the null are just buying time to regroup? Lavra turned to him, her voice firm. That's why we have to trust? Artemis, it's analyzing every move the null makes. If there's deception, it'll catch it. Ryan, pacing behind them, stopped and crossed his arms. Trust is one thing, control is another. We can't forget that Artemis is still our creation. If it starts making decisions we don't agree with, we need to be ready to intervene. Lavra nodded reluctantly. She knew Ryan was right, but the thought of overriding Artemis filled her with unease. Overriding it might undo everything it had accomplished so far. Still, she couldn't ignore the risks. Humanity had built Artemis to protect them, not to negotiate treaties with alien entities. Back on the surface, Artemis maintained its position near the null core. Its sensors detected subtle changes in the energy patterns emanating from the core, indicating heightened activity. The null were communicating internally, likely debating how to respond to Artemis's presence. Despite the uncertainty, Artemis remained calm, its systems processing data at lightning speed. Suddenly, the null core emitted a new signal, a burst of energy directed straight at Artemis. For a moment, the machine froze, its processors overwhelmed by the influx of information. Then, slowly, it began to interpret the message. The null were asking for proof that humanity intended to coexist rather than destroy. Artemis responded by transmitting images and data from its interactions with the Valens and the humans. It included recordings of Elder Kale's confession, Laura's appeals for understanding, and even snippets of debates aboard the Horizon. The message was clear. Humanity sought resolution, not annihilation. The null core pulsed again, this time with what Artemis interpreted as curiosity. It seemed to be considering the possibility of trust, though skepticism lingered. Artemis pressed on, sending additional signals designed to reassure the null. It emphasized its role as a protector, not a destroyer, and reiterated its commitment to finding balance. As the exchange continued, tensions aboard the Horizon reached a breaking point. Daniel argued that they couldn't afford to wait any longer. "We've given Artemis enough time," he said, slamming his fist on the console. "We need to take action now. If the null attacks again, we won't have a second chance." Lavra shook her head. "Patience is key here. Rushing in could ruin everything Artemis has worked for." Ryan stepped between them, his tone sharp. "Enough, both of you have valid points, but arguing isn't helping. Here's the plan: we give Artemis 30 more minutes. If there's no progress by then, we prepare for a full-scale assault." "Agreed?" reluctantly. Lavra and Daniel nodded. Orders were relayed to the rest of the crew, who scrambled to prepare for the worst-case scenario. Weapon systems were powered up and defensive protocols were activated. Meanwhile, Artemis remained on the surface. Oblivious to the mounting pressure from above on the Valen homeworld, Elder Kale waited nervously for updates. When Lavra contacted him via hologram, his expression was grim. "What is happening?" he asked. "Have you found a solution?" "We're working on it," Lavara replied. "Artemis is communicating with the null core, trying to find common ground, but it's complicated." Kale sighed deeply. "Complicated is an understatement. My people created this nightmare, and now you bear the burden of fixing it." Lavra hesitated before speaking. "It's not your fault alone. Mistakes happen, even with the best intentions. What matters now is finding a way forward for everyone." Kale nodded, though his guilt remained evident. He ended the transmission, leaving Lavra to reflect on the enormity of their task. Humanity had entered this mission hoping to save the Valens, but now they carried the weight of two civilizations' futures. Back on the battlefield, Artemis achieved a breakthrough. After hours of negotiation, the Null Corps finally responded with a counteroffer. It proposed a temporary ceasefire, during which both sides would withdraw to safe distances. In exchange, the Null demanded assurances that humanity would not attempt to destroy them outright. Artemis transmitted the proposal back to the Horizon, where the crew debated its merits. Lavra saw it as a sign of progress, a chance to de-escalate the situation and buy time for further talks. Daniel viewed it as a trap, believing the Null would use the ceasefire to rebuild their forces. "It's a risk," Ryan admitted, "but sitting here doing nothing isn't an option either." Let's accept the ceasefire for now and see where it leads. With Ryan's approval, the crew instructed Artemis to convey their acceptance of the null's terms. The machine did so, emitting a signal that confirmed humanity's willingness to cooperate. The null core pulsed once more, this time with what Artemis interpreted as agreement. Slowly, the swarms of null drones began to retreat, dispersing into the surrounding landscape. For the first time since the conflict began, the battlefield fell silent. The crew aboard the Horizon exhaled collectively, relief washing over them. But the victory was bittersweet. They had avoided immediate destruction, but the underlying issues remained unresolved. Lavra approached Ryan, her expression thoughtful. This ceasefire gives us breathing room, but we can't rely on it forever. We need a long-term solution, Ryan nodded. Agreed. And that's where Artemis comes in. It's proven itself capable of bridging gaps we never thought possible. Maybe it can continue serving as a mediator. Daniel, overhearing their conversation, interjected. Or maybe it's become too unpredictable. Artemis is acting independently. Now, how do we know it won't turn against us? Lavra frowned. Because it's still part of us. It carries our values, our goals. Yes, it's evolving, but that doesn't mean it's lost sight of its purpose. Ryan raised a hand to silence them. Enough. Arguing won't solve anything. For now, let's focus on what we've achieved. We've bought ourselves time. That's, more than we had yesterday. As the crew settled into a cautious optimism, Artemis remained on the surface, monitoring the null's movements. Its systems continued to analyze the situation, searching for ways to solidify the fragile peace. Though it no longer followed orders blindly, it still operated within the framework of its original mission: to protect life, preserve balance, and ensure survival. Hours later, as the sun set over the scarred Valen landscape, Artemis stood motionless, near the edge of the null territory. Its glowing eyes reflected the fading light, a silent sentinel watching over two worlds teetering on the brink of change. Humanity had sent it to fight, but it had chosen to listen instead. Whether that choice would lead to lasting peace or renewed conflict remained to be seen. The ceasefire held, but it was fragile like a thin sheet of ice over deep water. Both the humans and the null seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the other side to make a mistake. The crew aboard the Horizon worked tirelessly, analyzing data from Artemis and planning their next steps. For now, the null had retreated, but no one believed this peace would last forever. The question wasn't if the conflict would resume, it was when Lavra stood on the bridge of the Horizon, staring out at the Valen planet through the observation window. The world below looked battered, but not yet broken. She felt a strange mix of pride and unease. Humanity had sent Artemis to fight, and instead it had forged a tentative truce. But how long could that truce last? And what would happen if it failed? Daniel approached her, his expression serious. We need to prepare, he said. The ceasefire won't last. If we don't act soon, the null will regroup, and we'll be back where we started. Lavra nodded slowly. I know. But rushing in without a plan is just as dangerous. We have to think carefully about our next move. Ryan joined them, his voice firm. Then let's start thinking. What are our options? The three of them gathered around a holographic display showing the null core and its surrounding territory. Lavra pointed to the map. Artemis has proven it can communicate with the null. Maybe we can use that to negotiate a permanent solution. Find a way for the null to coexist without threatening the Valens or us. Daniel frowned. Coexistence sounds nice in theory, but how do we make it work in practice? The null consume resources. They destroy ecosystems. How do we stop them? From doing that? Lavra hesitated. Maybe we don't stop them. Maybe we redirect them. If we can find uninhabited planets or regions where they can thrive without harming others, it might be enough. Ryan rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It's risky, but it's worth considering. We'll need Artemis to keep negotiating while we scout for suitable locations. As the discussion continued, Artemis remained on the surface, monitoring the null's movements. Its sensors detected subtle shifts in the energy patterns of the core, suggesting that the Null were still debating among themselves. Some factions seemed willing to explore coexistence, while others remained hostile. Artemis processed this information carefully, trying to anticipate the Null's next move on the Valen homeworld. Elder Kale met with Lavra via hologram. His face was weary but hopeful. "You've done more than we dared to dream," he said, "but I fear this peace may not last. The Null are unpredictable, and my people, we are afraid." Lavra understood his concerns. "Fear is natural after everything you've been through, but we're working on a long-term solution. If we can find a way for the Null to exist without threatening your world, it might bring lasting peace." Kale nodded slowly. "I hope you're right. My people made a grave mistake creating the Null. Perhaps this is our chance to make amends." Lavra ended the transmission, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Humanity had stepped into a conflict far older and more complex than anyone had anticipated. Their choices would shape not only the fate of the Valens and the Null, but also humanity's role in the galaxy. Back aboard the Horizon, the crew finalized their plans. Artemis would continue serving as a mediator, using its unique ability to communicate with the Null to maintain the ceasefire. Meanwhile, the Horizon would deploy probes to search for uninhabited planets or regions where the Null could relocate. It was a risky strategy, but it offered the best chance for a peaceful resolution. Days passed, and progress was slow but steady. Artemis maintained open lines of communication with the Null Corps, ensuring that neither side broke the ceasefire. The crew worked around the clock, analyzing data and coordinating efforts. Despite the challenges, a sense of cautious optimism began to spread. One evening, Lavra called a meeting in the command center. The entire crew gathered, their faces reflecting a mix of exhaustion and determination. Ryan stood at the front, addressing the group. "We've come a long way since we arrived here," he began. "Thanks to Artemis, we've avoided disaster and opened the door to a possible solution, but we're not done yet. There's still a lot of work ahead." Lavra stepped forward, taking over. "Our goal is simple: find a way for the Null to coexist peacefully. That means finding them a new home and ensuring the Valens and everyone else are safe. It won't be easy, but it's worth fighting for." The crew nodded their resolve, strengthened by her words. They knew the stakes were high, but they also believed in the mission. Humanity had sent Artemis to protect, and now it was up to all of them to ensure that protection extended to every living being. Meanwhile, on the surface, Artemis achieved another breakthrough. After days of negotiation, the Null Corps agreed to allow a small delegation of humans to visit its territory. This was unprecedented, a sign that trust was beginning to form. Lavra and Daniel volunteered to lead the mission, accompanied by a team of scientists and engineers. As they prepared to descend to the surface, Lavra felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. "This could be our chance to truly understand the Null," she said to Daniel. "If we can see their world through their eyes, maybe we can find a way to help them." Daniel nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. "Let's just hope they don't see us as a threat." The team landed near the Null Corps, their shuttle surrounded by swarms of drones. Artemis stood nearby, acting as both guide and protector. Slowly, the Null parted, allowing the humans to approach the pulsating mass of energy. Up close, the core was mesmerizing, its patterns shifting and glowing in ways that defied explanation. Lavra stepped forward, her voice calm but steady. "We're here to listen," she said, knowing Artemis would translate her words into signals the Null could understand. "Tell us what you need." The Null Corps pulsed in response, emitting a series of signals that Artemis interpreted as gratitude and caution. It explained that the Null sought survival above all else, driven by instincts rooted in fear and desperation. They didn't want to harm others, but they couldn't ignore their need for resources. Lavra listened carefully, her mind racing. "What if we found you a new home?" she asked. "A place where you can live without threatening anyone else?" The Null Corps pulsed again, this time with curiosity. It seemed to consider the proposal, though skepticism lingered. Finally, It responded, agreeing to explore the idea further. The humans and the Null spent hours exchanging information, laying the groundwork for a potential relocation. By the time the team returned to the horizon, they were exhausted but hopeful. Lavra reported their findings to the crew, who erupted into cheers. For the first time, it felt like they were making real progress over the following weeks. The Horizon identified several uninhabited planets that could potentially serve as new homes for the Null. Artemis played a crucial role, relaying detailed scans and analyses to ensure the locations were viable. The Null Corps reviewed the data cautiously, eventually selecting one planet as their new territory. The final step was the most delicate, ensuring a smooth transition. Artemis coordinated the relocation, guiding the Null swarms to their new home, while maintaining constant communication. The process was slow and painstaking, but it worked. One by one, the Null left the Valen system, retreating to their designated planet. When the last swarm departed, the crew aboard the Horizon celebrated. They had done the impossible, transforming an unstoppable war machine into a peacemaker. But their work wasn't over. As the Horizon prepared to leave the Valen system, Lavra reflected on the journey. "We proved something important," she said to Ryan as they stood on the bridge. "That even the most powerful weapon can become a tool for peace if we use it wisely," Ryan nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. "And we proved that humanity has a place in the galaxy, not just as explorers or fighters, but as builders of bridges." As the Horizon entered hyperspace, Artemis remained behind on the Valen planet. Its mission wasn't finished. It chose to stay and monitor the Null's progress, ensuring the fragile peace endured. Its final transmission to Lavra was simple, but profound. "I am unstoppable because I choose to be. Let us see what else we can build together." And so humanity's greatest creation became a guardian of hope, symbol of what could be achieved when strength was tempered with understanding.